Well, come back to another episode of The Stroke of Midnight. Dorian, last week was a fun episode.
It was. I really enjoyed
an unexpectedly fun episode. We got to talk about the sphere and some other things. And apparently some people were unhappy with a certain stance that I took. And I caught some shit.
Oh, I'm excited to hear about this.
Oh, yeah. So, do you remember when I said that I would laugh in someone's face if I thought that if they proposed to me that we would promote the production as the selling point for the concert?
Mm-hmm. I do remember that distinctly.
I had multiple people reach out to me and say, the name of the project is Pretty Lights because it has a pretty light show. Isn't that promoting the production? Dorian, as the documentarian of Pretty Lights, can you please inform the audience of where the name Pretty Lights came from?
The name Pretty Lights did not come from the Pretty Light Show. Derek has told me the story on camera. I have it in an interview of exactly where this came from, and I absolutely cannot recall right now.
Okay, well, I'll give you the Cliff Notes.
Yeah.
He got the phrase from a Pink Floyd poster.
That's right. Come and see the pretty lights.
But the idea was to like appreciate like the beautiful things in life and to like take notice, be present, blah, 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 blah. That's really what the essence of the name is. I just happen to live up to the name.
Right.
But by no means is Derek was called Pretty Lights when he was playing in fucking basements for frat parties in 2007.
I was going to say
there was a light show.
Yeah, look up old videos of Pretty Lights. It's definitely not the progenitor of the whole thing. It was it was somewhat prophetic, of course.
Yeah, that's that's the thing. I had a certain expectation put upon me. It wasn't the other way around. It wasn't, hey, we're a concert with pretty lights. We turned into a concert with pretty lights. Yeah. But Pretty Lights existed before the light show did.
Yeah.
So to all of you, or the few of you anyway, who took the time to reach out to me to say that, I say thank you for giving me more credit than I deserve.
As though you were the reason the band was named that. It's think about it, more figuratively, less literally, and in a more abstract sense of like what are pretty lights in a broader sense in terms of experience of all stripes and sensory input of all manners. So
exactly. Yeah. It was a situation that I had to live up to, which made my life much more difficult, to be frank. It wasn't like, oh, well, Greg's really good at his job. Let's call this thing Pretty Lights. Yeah, right.
and like, just to be completely honest, like, how lame would that be too?
The worst. That's what I mean. That's what I was saying last week. Like, like the music comes first in a concert setting. If I was like, and I, this is something we'll talk about next week because we've already kind of this week's episode is going to kind of segue nicely into next week's episode. But like when I do finally decide or have the time to pull the trigger on some of the other things that I would like to do in a public setting, the focus will be the lights. Now, it won't be music based. So then we can promote the visual thing because the visual thing is the lead.
Is the thing, yeah.
In a concert, the music is the lead and everything else is a supporting role. No matter how cool it is, no matter how impactful it is, I am always, at the end of the day, a supporting character in the story of Pretty Lights and or Daily Bread and or any other artist that I work with. I'm just a supporting character. And I'm okay with that. I'm good with that. I like that. But eventually I'll be the lead in something else, and it'll be weird, and it'll probably turn a lot of people off because it won't be it won't be as digestible as as the things that I've done for the last 20 years.
Pure uncut Greg.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot. So with that, this week's topic is here. I just pulled up. I like to actually, especially when Dorian creates these, his are very eloquent. Approaches to creativity. Oh, actually, this is not eloquent at all. There's some gobbledygook at the end of this. Well, do you have your note open?
Yeah, I'm pulling it up right now. What happened?
Would you like to decipher whatever that is after discipline versus disorder?
Oh, in mine, there's just a period.
Did I write something? It says the ow causes M. Theo causes. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't have anything there. I just have a nice clean sentence.
We got a glitch in the matrix. Okay, well, back to Dorian's eloquent theme for this week. Approaches to creativity, discipline versus disorder. Where to begin?
Yeah, seriously.
Okay. I'm going to say this as a nice little launching pad. I am going into my 23rd year as a production designer, lighting designer, whatever you want to call me. Dork with a fucking bunch of shit on stage. In the beginning, I was very disciplined. I practiced constantly. I was fortunate enough to work at a venue, Toad's Place in New Haven, Connecticut, that would allow me to use the space on any night off, that any day that the venue was blacked out, that it didn't have a show. So I would go in and I would literally just play music and just practice running lights and experiment and practice and just get better with my timing and, ability to navigate the desk and so on and so forth. And so I think, like, in the early stages of my career, it was all discipline. And then at some point along the way, it turned into disorder. It's like, I think it's like with any creative endeavor, you want to build a strong foundation for whatever it is that you're doing. You want to be technically proficient. And then once you kind of reach that precipice where you say, okay, I got this. Mm-hmm. I got a handle on this now. I feel confident in my ability to execute what is expected of me.
Yeah.
Once you reach that point, that's when you start to think, how can I do things that are unexpected? And then that's where the disorder comes in, because then you start to experiment and you start to, reach into the fringe of whatever it is that you're doing and, find things that have never been done before. But you can't get there if you didn't have the discipline to get you to the dance in the first place. Right?
Yeah.
What for you? I mean, like, it's a creative space, but it's a very, I guess it's just as like my stuff is just as technical as yours, but I always see film as being exponentially more technical because of the nuances of cameras versus lighting versus, like in a performance space, there's give and take, with just the live nature of it, I guess. How has that worked for you in your career?
So yeah, no, it's interesting because I kind of had the complete opposite experience. I think I started more in a world of disorder and have moved towards being more disciplined in the execution of my craft. But yeah, no, I mean, I've always been just kind of like naturally an organized person. So like there's some element, like when I say disorder, I don't mean like absolute fucking chaos, like what you might expect from, an artist talking about living like a chaotic life.
If I like posted a picture of my paint studio, that would be the encyclopedia definition of disorder.
Yes, exactly. But it was more like just in terms of like what I was pursuing from a film standpoint and what I was trying to do with cinema was more just kind of, grab this wild beast of creativity by the mane and just like fucking ride it and hold on as long as you can and just see where it takes you. So the stuff that I was writing and filming and like doing, especially in film school, was very much like, I don't know, pure, just these are the thoughts that just came to mind when I started thinking about like a film. It wasn't even like, I'm not even going to go to the point of like, oh, here's like the story I want to tell. I actually struggled with the term storyteller for like a while when I first started film, because I was just very like, no, I just want to make art, It doesn't necessarily have to be narrative based, and in a lot of ways I want to sort of like do away with that and do something that's just more in the experimental art installation, art film kind of like world. And, our like my teachers and stuff kept banging this word into my head. They're like, no, like, trust you have to like think of yourself as a storyteller, even no matter what you're doing, no matter how obscure and out there, there's still something you're trying to say, a story that you're telling in some way or another,
Yeah.
And, and once that finally like penetrated and I actually started to, consider that perspective, it did open things up in a broad way. And that was, I think, like the start of some kind of discipline being injected into everything. And, for a while it was still like, okay, well, the stories that I'm going to tell, I'm going to go like wildly off the rails with, and just kind of, the ideas that I have, I'm going to go with them and trust them. And again, going back to David Lynch, he was very intuitive, trust your subconscious kind of a guy.
Sure.
From an artistic standpoint. He was like, even if you don't understand it at the moment, like if you know that you're in it as far as what it is you're working on and like the mood and the feel and the story that you're going for, if this idea comes, even if you don't get it, like you have to trust that. And like trust that your subconscious is doing this great work for you and is bringing you this gift.
Yeah.
So like just because you don't get it right away, like don't throw it away, keep it around. And oftentimes those are the things that you realize later, like that was like the key to the whole thing, or like really kind of like made this so much more special than what it was before. So
that's a whole, I'm thinking about how like I can draw a lot of parallels to how my I don't know if you'd call it career yet, but my journey into painting has actually been a very similar experience to what you're describing. The only difference being, and maybe this is just because of my experience as a creative in the concert space and just being around other creatives for 2 decades, I realized almost from day one that the only way I would be a good painter is if I was telling a story in those paintings.
Right.
Because, I mean, technically speaking, I'm not a good painter. but I can tell a good story, and I see things a little differently than, the average person, or most anybody really, for that matter. There's this great story that I've told a few times in the past. I took a few painting classes with this abstract artist who is nationally known. He's not like famous, but within the art community, highly respected. And his class was really hard to get into, and the timing, I don't know, I don't remember exactly how it worked, but basically he would only have like 5 students at a time. And I think what ended up happening was he like added another class, and I just happened to like be at the right place at the right time, and I was able to get into this extra class that he had added. So on the first day, he gives you 0 instructions. So there's no like welcome email. There's no like, this is what you should bring. This is what we're doing. There's none of that. There's literally no communication. So I reach out. So I reach out to the coordinator of the art center, right? And I was like, I haven't heard from him. And like, am I in the class? She's like, oh yeah, that's just how he operates. Like, just show up, bring whatever you want. And I was like, oh, okay, great. Like, this sounds perfect, you know? And so we get to the class. He introduces himself, talks for a few minutes just about, you know, kind of broad strokes, like what it means to be abstract, what it means to be an artist, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, all right, so now go ahead and start. And everyone just kind of looks at each other and like, he's like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. Like, he could tell that and he's obviously gone through this spiel a few times now, you know? And so like, he knows that he's challenging everyone by being not challenging. And so like, he's like, paint whatever you want. I'm just going to kind of walk around and observe, and we'll see, you know, what happens. And so he's walking around the room, talks to this person, talks to that person. He walks by me like 5 or 6 times, doesn't say a fucking word to me. And he saves me for last. And I was like, this is not good. This is, I don't know what's about to happen. And he goes, so what's your story? He could tell something was up, right?
It continues to not look good.
What's your story? And I was like, huh? He's like, well, just tell me about yourself. I don't care about this right now. Just tell me about yourself. And I was like, all right, well, you know, I've been a concert lighting designer for 20 years. You know, obviously the pandemic took my world away from me, and I had a lot of free time on my hands. So I needed a new outlet, and this is where I found myself. And he's like, well, this all makes sense. This all checks out. And I was like, what? Like, what is going on right now? Like the whole time, just like in a state of pure confusion the entire time that I'm talking to this guy. And he's like, here's the deal. He's like, you have the technique of a 5-year-old. He's like, but you understand color theory better than almost anybody I've ever seen. And he's like, and that's the gift. He's like, anyone can learn technique, but you can't learn how to see things the way that you see things. And he's like, and just so hold on to that, and you'll get better, and you'll be fine. You'll be doing great things eventually if you keep at it. And that was the moment when I realized, okay, I need to have some discipline here, and I actually need to practice things so that way I can develop techniques. But also, like, just in that whole interaction of him being like this very, like, he presented himself in such an abstract way that it was unsettling almost. And I was like, I know that I am very, 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 like, capable of presenting myself in that exact same way. So I have to detach myself slightly from the completely free version of myself. And so I was like, okay, if I can translate all of the weird shit that's in my head and try to present it in a way that makes sense to people, then as the technique comes, the way I see things, blah, blah, blah. So obviously, like the path of least resistance was tying songs to each of these paintings, because like whether it's a mood thing or a form or however, you know, each painting can speak to a song in its own unique way. But that was the way that I was like, okay, I can connect with people because they already know me as someone who works in the music industry. If I take that with me into the painting world, then it's an easy line to draw. And so, yeah, so the storytelling aspect of what I've been doing kind of came easy, but it was also because I had 20 years of experience just being creative already. So you know, when you change course slightly, just because you're working in a new medium doesn't mean you're starting over. You still have all the lessons that you learned from from whatever it was in the other thing you were doing, and then you take all of those and you apply them to this new situation.
Just like the word pretty lights can mean more than just lights themselves. So many of the things that you learn in one discipline or medium can be applicable to another if you just look at them from sort of like a more lateral kind of standpoint, or more a broader, more abstract kind of perspective. And I've definitely found that, because I was studying music for a little while before I got into film. I had like played some instruments when I was younger, and and then got super into like Phish when I was in like late high school and stuff, and was just kind of discovering more of my creative streak. Writing has really kind of been the thing that I've maintained the longest that I've been doing, as far as like just creative endeavors. But initially I was like, I want to be a musician. And I was taking lessons, and I tried to get into like Berklee College of Music in Boston. I was living out there with a couple of my friends who were musicians, just sort of like playing music with them and just trying to get better and all this type of stuff, and trying to get in school there. And ended up realizing, thankfully, that this wasn't the right path for me, and like film is the way to go. But exactly as you're saying, there's so much. I mean, yes, there's many things that like, okay, working in film, just working with like a composer on a film, being able to speak the language of music a little bit better than the average person definitely is like very helpful. Sometimes it gets me in trouble too, because I know like just enough to be wrong sometimes. But
I fall trap to that as well, where it's like, I know what I'm trying to say, but I'm not saying the right thing. Can you figure out what I'm trying to say to you right now?
Yep.
Can you?
But even more so in a broader sense, there was just a lot that I had learned about like just approaches to creativity and like the artistic drive, in general, that were like completely translated directly over into working in film. I felt like when I started, I had like a leg up on a lot of the others. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, I know, about, and you addressed this briefly, about moving into a new medium. So recently, as you have with your painting, so have you found, like, are you actually taking a disciplined approach currently, or has it been more of like let me just like get in a room with some paint, some canvas, and see what happens?
Yeah, a little from column A, a little from column B.
Yeah.
I mean, so the way that I kind of think about things is I take the most open approach that I possibly can to the ideas. And then from like a discipline standpoint, I force myself. So what's the best way to describe this? Because it's interesting kind of circumstances, because what I'll do is I'll find an approach, a technique, right? So whether it's some sort of blade work, or maybe a certain like medium that I'm using, or just different brushstrokes and so on and so forth. I try to I try to hone in on those techniques from painting to painting. And so, like, let's say, I don't know, let's say 4 paintings, consecutive paintings, they may look completely different, but they share a lot of similar techniques that are used. And then once I kind of feel comfortable with a certain technique, then I'll kind of avoid it for a little while. Okay. And then I'll introduce some new techniques. And then once I kind of, and then it's this kind of like, pick up this thing, run with it for a little while, put it back down, pick up a new thing, run with it for a little while, put it back down. And then as over the years, now I've kind of gotten to this place where I am using all, this was in the early days, right? So like for the first like 2 years, it was very much like just, it was all about like different ways to apply paint to canvas, like different techniques as far as that goes, right? Once I got to a point where I felt good about like just the actual physical act of painting on my terms, then it became this thing of like wet versus dry, and then different, color theory things. And the biggest takeaway that I've taken from learning how to paint is that it's actually expanded my scope of what color theory is and can be. And so like to have that compliment from that artist 4 years ago, and then to like look at what I've done since then and be like, man, I wish he could. He right after those classes, he put his family in a van and moved across the country, and I haven't spoken to him in like 3 years. And
true artist.
Like, damn, I wish he could see this shit now. I was like, I wish he could see this shit now, man. Because if he was impressed by my color theory then, he'd fucking lose his mind now.
Well, it's interesting because like color theory is so different from light to paint. Like the way that lights mix as colors and the way that paint mixes colors is very different.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So here's the thing about color theory in my mind. I don't approach it so much from a scientific standpoint. I understand color mixing, right? Color mixing and complementary colors, and okay, well, if you mix blue and yellow, you get green. But that doesn't work in lighting, right? Because lighting works on an RGB scale, and paint and anything else works on an RBY scale. So there are two different like forms of the same thing. So like the mixing situations and all that. So the actual like technical side of color theory works differently in those two worlds, but it's also it's same but different, right? Yeah, right? Like if you just know what your foundations are, then the rest works itself out. But what I mean by color theory and how I perceive color theory is how do you allow for color to coexist in ways that they shouldn't? And to me, that's where color theory is important, because you can take contrasting colors and make them complementary if you balance them correctly. And so instead of using the term color theory, let's use the term color harmony, because that's really what it is. And creating a scene, whether it's a lighting scheme or whether it's on a canvas, if you have 6 colors present that shouldn't go together but somehow look amazing in its final form, that's where like color theory or color harmony comes into play. And it's like this balancing act of like, the easiest way I could describe it is like if you took red, purple, yellow, and orange, right? If you have a lot of red and a lot of yellow and then a little bit of purple and a little bit of orange, it's probably going to look like shit. But if you have a lot of red and a lot of purple and yellow and orange accents, it probably looks amazing, right? And so it's the like balancing act,
proportion and
of
intensity,
where they
and,
the purport, and placement also. Placement's also important. So like that's where it becomes this whole like, when you can see past convention and say, if I just throw a little bit of this in there, it's going to change the entire aesthetic of what you're looking at. And so there's a certain adventureness to that, but there's also just this like kind of intuition, like you spoke of, where it's like, this is missing something, it needs something, I think this is it, and more often than not, it's the right decision. And so like in painting, it's interesting because you can always kind of add, but you can't really subtract. I mean, you can subtract, but it's not, It's I mean, if you just dump a bunch of white back, if you dump a bunch of white on the canvas, then I suppose you're subtracting. But like, I oftentimes will find myself starting with, let's say if I start with two colors, any two colors, doesn't matter, blue and green, right? Blah blah blah. You know what ends up happening by the end of that painting? There's almost no blue in it, and maybe a tiny little bit of green in it. So it's not like, for me, when I paint, it's this journey that I'm taking myself on. And whatever the first thing I may have this image in my head of like where I want to go, but more often than not, something happens that sends me down a different path. And so you got to be willing to accept those moments when they happen. And so like, I'll start with something with the goal of that being maybe the foundation of what the final piece will be. But more often than not, as I keep going further and further and further down the road, I cover up more and more of it, and I find ways to like connect the dots of the things that, happened prior, and it takes on a whole new life of its own. And it's the way that certain things mix together, the way that certain things sit against each other. And then it's this like call and response kind of situation for me, where it's like, I'm not going in with like this like line drawing of what I'm trying to do. It's just very much it's like
you haven't done like studies on like small scale.
No, there's
there's
none of it's very much it's each painting is an adventure into a form and a lot of disorder, especially when you start working with like different mediums, or if you incorporate water. And then as you let things kind of settle and you say, okay, well, this needs to be adjusted or whatever. And it's a very reactionary approach that I take, instead of like a precautionary approach. Like, I'm not like, oh, pretty little minor details.
It's not prescribed.
No, the color harmony, and then the sense of motion. That's like two of the things that, like, when people have like complimented my paintings, those are like the two big things. Like, they can feel an energy in the paintings. It conveys something to them more often than not. Like, it's not like I'm just looking at an image. I feel like there's this like, there's motion to it, or whatever. I don't even know how to describe it.
To it. It's hard. Like there's some action that like occurs before and after this painting, and I'm seeing like the middle of it. Which is a really very cool thing to be able to convey in a still image.
Well, and I think that comes from being a lighting designer, honestly, because that's all the lights move and the music is moving and you're reacting and responding. And so I think there's a lot of natural cohesion between the two art forms for me personally, where it's like I'm translating how I see things as a lighting designer into a painting is basically what's happening. Right. So there's context. There's already like this established context for like what the aesthetic or what the style is or whatever. And so
it's like it becomes like a hybrid of discipline and disorder. And like I end up working the same way. Like ultimately that's kind of where I landed. Like now the way I work is generally like a blend of the two, where it's, I come in with like a very, very well detailed plan of like everything that we're going to shoot that day. And like, it's all been storyboarded and like I've got it edited together basically on paper usually before we go and shoot anything. So I know it's like these shots will work. We don't have to waste money like shooting extra stuff because I know like we get these, it's going to sequence exactly the way I want it. But as anyone who's ever worked a day on a film set knows, like shit happens.
Yeah.
And it happens fast and it happens very tragically sometimes. So things that you've spent so much time like and have kind of like pinned the whole project on all of a sudden like don't work or can't work or didn't show up that day or whatever. So you've got to be able to pivot, and it's just sort of like part of the that's just part of filmmaking. It's just the way it is. So it's become kind of a natural thing to do, but I've come to actually like really appreciate that element, and like knowing that like I feel much better about pivoting and improvising when I've already got a solid plan in place, because it's like I still know what I'm trying to accomplish even if we have to do it a different way.
You just gave me you just inspired like the greatest phrase ever.
What's that?
Discipline empowers disorder.
It's true.
Because like if you got a handle on your shit, then you can approach a situation with full confidence saying, if shit hits the fan, it's going to be okay. I got it, and there may be a certain like kind of folly to that as well, where, or you could maybe use the word arrogance. That seems to be a word that gets thrown my way lately. So, but like if you're solid in what you're doing, then you welcome the disorder that may or may not present itself.
Right. And how to like take whatever that disorder is, quote unquote. I'm doing air quotes because podcast people listening to this can definitely see that. But yeah, the oh God, I completely lost my train of thoughts after making the bad air quotes joke.
Got to be careful with those.
They'll get you. Yeah, anyway, no, I completely forgot what I was going to say. It's gone. It has run off into the wind.
Well, okay, so here's a good question. Here's a question for you. So, you just finished shooting a music video.
Yeah.
And you've obviously been working on the documentary. How can you kind of delineate the differences in the approach between like the different types of film shoots that you're going on? Because obviously like I would assume a music video is much more structured. Obviously a documentary, you're in the wild, and then any other types of projects that you've been on, and like how you can sort of like plan for, the best, hope, or plan for the worst, hope for the best kind of thing, or
no. And that actually reminds me exactly what I was going to say is that, because the documentary format, production for a documentary kind of like epitomizes this whole idea, which is that, essentially the disorder, whatever it is, whether it be actual like chaos or you're just like kind of going for it and saying like, I don't know, I had this idea, so I'm going for it. But as you said, the discipline empowers that. It's like having the discipline, that like, even if you're pursuing something that's off the cuff, you're going to be able to do it in a way that's effective. And that's going to actually like bring that idea to life and through the screen and into the viewer or whatever the communication transmission medium is. But documentary, absolutely. As you just stated, the music video was much more fully structured out. I had like a very detailed shot list of these are all the things. I also happen to be the cinematographer for that music video, which is not something I generally do. So in addition to directing and producing it, I was also shooting it. So that was like because I was taking on this extra role, I was like extra prepared.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to have to think about anything that's not absolutely necessary. I want to be able to just like go down the list and then, you know, have the time to be able to like work with the actors and the musicians and, you know, really get what we need out of it. So yeah, that was very structured and kind of stayed that way. Luckily, nothing too crazy came up that we couldn't overcome pretty quickly. So that all went like totally according to plan, versus the documentary, and especially just anything with Pretty Lights, is like, you can plan all you want, man, until you show up the day of to do the thing, like nobody knows what it's going to be.
Well, what was that line that you guys used of mine in the little teaser there? What was Pretty Lights what is Pretty Lights? It's an experiment in chaos.
Yes. Exactly. So yeah. And then especially with the documentary on top of it, where it's like, you know, usually other stuff that we're doing, we at least have kind of like a guideline or a creative, you know, kind of mission that we're trying to accomplish. But with the doc, it's like, you know, I'm approaching the documentary very specifically, more, you know, not totally in the cinema verite style, but more like that, where it's like, I want to be as unintrusive as possible as the documentarian. You know, I've been around enough that like, I know that like just interesting stuff is happening pretty consistently. And like, I don't need to manufacture that or try to nudge it in certain directions or do anything you know, manipulative like that.
Give it the reality TV treatment.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so the funny thing is, like, you know, this type of stuff is actually a very, in a way, beautiful, long-standing tradition of documentary filmmaking. Because even what is considered the very first documentary ever made, a movie called Nanook of the North, which is about a indigenous tribe in, you know, what we used to call Eskimos. But yeah, so it was this whole sort of like ethnographic kind of like, hey, look at this like crazy tribe of people that live out in the middle of nowhere in the Arctic and all this stuff. And so they had all these shots, but like this is the first documentary and they were manipulating everything.
Really?
Like, yeah, there's like behind the scenes footage, because there's this one shot that they do that's like, it's like clown car style, where they're like in this big like canoe kayak thing. And it's like, you know, the guy gets out and then his wife crawls out and then like the kids are like under there and like 4 kids come crawling out and everything. And it's like, I mean, you can tell by modern standards nowadays, like where the cuts are and everything. But at the time, people weren't that sophisticated.
Sure.
As far as like, you know, being movie watchers and understanding the medium. So it was like, literally the first time anybody set out to make a documentary, they were like, you know what, let's make this a little more interesting.
Yeah.
And
they were probably like, this is boring as fuck. No one's gonna want to watch this.
Yeah. And apparently even so far as like, you know, because they're definitely portrayed as like, you know, primitive and like all this stuff and kind of living, you know, they don't, wow, what are these like technological contraptions you have? But apparently behind the scenes, they were actually like really savvy to the world, and these people were like helping the guy like repair his camera and stuff like that just throughout the shoot, because they were like,
oh no shit.
Yeah. So the manipulation of subjects and subject matter in documentary has been literally since the you know, the genre began, which is funny, but I'm trying not to do that.
Well, I mean, and I think, I think like that's, I mean,
yeah, sidebar, but
but I'm just trying to think, like, they had an idea, but they didn't actually like understand, or they didn't understand what they were actually trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
Totally. You know, and so they just made the best of the situation. Exactly. I think like once people fully understood, like, okay, like
what a documentary can be and can do.
Yeah.
Totally.
Because I think of like you know, what's that dude? Like Michael Moore or something like that, right? Like, would you consider that a documentary, or would you consider that like what is like Super Size, or not Super Size Me, whatever
there was like Bowling for Columbine or Roger and Me and stuff like that. I mean, and you know, it's interesting because Michael Moore himself, I think, has even like discussed this at length, and how, you know, that term is maybe not necessarily like, you know, totally appropriate or accurate to like what he does. But you know, that's part of the thing, is like he's obviously using all things that are documented from reality. But you know, it's obviously being, you know, used to construct a narrative to forward a certain perspective and point of view. And like, you know, that's totally fine, like, because it's an interesting question, because so what really comes up is this question of like bias, right? Like, okay, are you enforcing bias on the footage and you know, and pushing it in a certain direction? And it's like, frankly,
everything
exactly, if you want to discuss bias, like, you know, anytime you make an edit in film, you're enforcing a bias, you know? So really, like, everything is biased, no matter how quote unquote unbiased it presents itself to be. So, you know, in that sense, it's like, how is this documentary not any more valid than another documentary? You know, that
so here's an experiment for you then. Maybe you could be the first person to do this. I'm assuming someone's already done it, but I could be wrong. I don't know. So what do you think, as a filmmaker, what do you think would be the outcome if you were to take all of the footage that you've recorded for the Pretty Lights documentary and you fed it to AI and you said, turn this into a 90-minute long feature-length documentary? Do you think AI could produce it bias-free?
No, definitely not. Yeah. I don't think so. I mean, again, it's like, and whatever it chooses to include or not include is bias. So especially in terms of like the interview footage in particular, but also in terms of like, you know, B-roll and just behind the scenes and whatever else type of footage is around. Funny you should bring that up, though. There's actually, and this is something I'm hoping to go see in a couple of weeks, because I'm just curious about that idea in general. Because certainly, you know, at times when climbing through this mountain of footage that I have for the doc, I'm like, could AI just do this? But so there is, and I don't know enough about the actual process by which this is made, but have you heard about the Brian Eno documentary?
I've heard about it, but I don't know anything. I just know that it exists, or that it's about to exist, I guess.
Yeah. So it's been around. It's been playing for like the past, I don't know, 7 months or 8 months or so.
Oh, okay.
And it's coming through the Music Box in Chicago in a few weeks. But it is, so every time the movie screens, a new version of the film is produced by whatever AI algorithm they're using to do this. So every screen is different. Yeah.
So are they using like the reactions of the previous audience?
I don't think
to inform the updates, or it's just creating a new version just for the sake of creating a new version.
Yeah, I think just for the sake of it. I'm not sure if they're you know, continuing to teach whatever their model is, you know, off of like the audience reactions or whatever, but. So
very interesting.
Yeah, I'm really curious to go see it, because I have no idea if like, okay, is the whole thing just like made from scratch, from ground up every time, or are there certain anchors that are like obviously like these moments that kind of create the storytelling structure of the film,
and then it's just
be there,
and then it's just swap and replace like the tertiary things.
Exactly. Yeah. That. So I have no idea. I haven't actually been able to find that information, but I'm sure, you know, I could probably seek it out. But yeah, so I'm kind of curious about that. But there is actually a movie out there that's at least toying with the idea of what you just brought up. Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of experimental documentaries, have you heard about the Pavement documentary that's about to come out?
I think you might have sent me a trailer for it.
It looks fucking amazing.
Yeah.
But basically, what they've done is they've blurred the lines between documentary and biopic, and it swims in and out of each. So it is half documentary, half biopic, and then they just kind of merged it all together into one presentation.
Yeah.
And I am very, very intrigued to see what that's all about, because like, to dramatize things with actors while simultaneously playing, you know, archival footage like that, like and having it be so, like very like, what's the word I'm looking for? Because it's not like reenactment, so to speak, like, like when you watch some of these things, like especially like TV, like, behind the music's kind of things or whatever, they'll have reenactments for stories that are being told, but then they'll have archival footage. That's not what this is. It literally has like a narrative within the biopic, and then also has the documentary, and it kind of dances in and out of both, I guess. And
that's cool.
Very interesting approach.
Yeah, there's a couple. There's a movie called American Animals that kind of does a similar thing, where it's like it's a film about this actual attempted heist that these people did, and it's shot, scripted, cast, full film treatment, and then like 20 minutes into the movie, all of a sudden it cuts to an interview with one of like the actual people involved in the heist. And who's being played by one of the actors in the film. And it's like this holy shit moment. And then the whole movie kind of plays out where it's like we're watching the film version, but also seeing these interviews with the actual people involved. And it's really, really cool hybrid. When it works, like that's a really amazing approach.
Very cool.
But yeah, so I guess I know we've got a time limit here a little bit, but
I was going to say, I mean, we're having all this documentary talk. So here, okay, so let's just let the audience in on what we're going to be talking about next week. So then maybe if they have the time, they can also watch said documentary that we're going to use to kind of launch us on our next topic.
Oh, for sure.
So it's funny that the conversation just kind of naturally got us there. So next week, before I say this, on my flight home from Coachella the other day, I almost never, like 1 in every 25 flights, do I actually watch a movie on a flight. I usually fall asleep before the plane takes off and don't wake up until the plane lands. But for whatever reason, I just could not fall asleep. And then I was like, let's just see what's on here. I guess it was just one of those days, So, but I struck gold. Thank God. There is a documentary that came out last year called Flipside by filmmaker Chris Wiltshire. I guess that's how you pronounce it. He says his name in the documentary, Wiltshire. This documentary blew my mind. And I'm not going to give away any of its stuff. And I'm just going to say that's what we're going to be talking about next week. So if you have a couple hours in the next week to watch this documentary, you can take part in the conversation. You can shoot us a message on the little mailbag feature in the episode description. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. Let's just put it that way. Because I was feeling very high and low about myself while watching this. So
perfect. That's a that's a hell of a documentary.
I mean, those are the best. Those are the best stories, though, right? When you can take a moment to have some self-reflection and recognize both the positives and negatives that you're being presented with.
That illustrate the broad range of emotion capable of happening within you. Is a powerful story. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's literally my entire existence, is the full range of emotions all the time, at all times. So
your whole
someone call it
story. Yeah.
Someone call that bipolar. I try to avoid that term as much as possible. I like to just think of myself as sensitive, even though I don't come across as sensitive.
Yeah, you suffer from an abundance of feeling. Yeah.
There we go. I love that.
It.
Well,
that's all it is.
I think that's a beautiful way for us to end this week's episode. Thank you for listening. Watch Flipside, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dorian.
Thank you, Greg.